Good afternoon, I'm Vashon Brown with the Midday News. A special welcome if you're watching on onespotmedia.com. Changes are coming to ensure that tourists comply with measures in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. That's the word from Tourism Minister Ed Bartlett. It comes days after the Health Minister raised concerns that tourists have not been following the rules. Health officials have been concerned about tourists who violate protocols in place to remain within the resilient corridor, which runs mainly along the north coast. Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton recently pointed out that some tourists have been picked up and placed in state quarantine for breaching the rules.
We have had cases of persons leaving, particularly those staying in villas, and going out into other areas. And this, we believe, is risky. And clearly it's a breach of the order that were given as it relates to those types of non-nationals who come into the country.
Now the Tourism Minister Ed Bartlett says there will be greater enforcement of the protocols for visitors. In an interview with TVJ News, Mr. Bartlett said he's heard the concerns raised by the Health Minister.
And we are now putting together more than 77 wardens for the resort area, and particularly for the corridor. And we're also working with some private sector interests to increase the number of wardens that we're going to have to try to ensure that the surveillance that is required to keep visitors operating as stipulated, is strengthened.
More details about the new measures are expected this week from the John Biles-led Resilience Corridor Management Team. Strong measures will also be put in place to ensure that hoteliers and others within the corridor implement systems to ensure visitors comply with the protocols.
I'm amending the Tourist Board Act to give it more teeth in relation to dealing with breaches of this nature. And I believe that in time, we are going to have it correct. We're going to have it where the discipline that is required to operate within the corridor is respected by all. And where it is not respected, very, very strong measures will be taken in terms of licensing and other types of arrangements that are beneficial to visitors.
Mr. Bartlett says it cannot be business as usual.
We have to make it a requirement for you to comply, and where you don't comply, it must have teeth. We must be able to act and act strongly to make sure that you recognize that you can be prosecuted and will be prosecuted. And the plans are being finalized for the reopening of South Coast tourism. Mr. Bartlett says the intention is to create a resilience corridor similar to what is on the North Coast. The whole intention is to make sure that the corridors that are being created are done with the highest level of compliance possibilities. I'm very pleased to say that so far the reports that we've gotten from TPDCO with regards to COVID security compliance and resilience preparation on the South Coast is at a very good level. We want to look closer at that and to make an appropriate recommendation with regards to Phase 2A opening that would involve the South Coast. Meanwhile, the Tourism Minister says the government is making preparations for the reopening of cruise tourism in the coming months. We are waiting on CDC and we're waiting on the no-sail order, which at the moment is in September. So tourism for cruise may not recommence in our area until possibly October. But we have to do the preparation for the cruise, and I'm going to begin that discussion with the team that we established under Professor Shirley to look very closely now at what the protocols that we've established and what level of physical arrangements have to be put in place to ensure that the cruise return will be seamless. To other news now, as students begin to sit the CSEC and CAPE examinations, the Caribbean Examination Council (CXC) is encouraging them to follow the health protocols in place. Just under 75,000 students are sitting exams, which started this morning. Chief Executive Officer at CXC, Dr. Wayne Wesley, says examination centers across the region have implemented safety measures amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
All examination centers and invigilators will follow national health protocols as it relates to social distancing, the wearing of masks, and the sanitization of hands and surfaces. We are encouraging all candidates to arrive early at the examination centers and to follow the guidelines and instructions provided by invigilators and center staff.
In the meantime, Dr. Wesley says the expected release date for the exam results is September 22. Both CSEC and CAPE exams will end on August 4. And Medical Officer of Health for Westmoreland, Dr. Marcia Graham, says all the schools in the parish that will participate in the CXC exams have been visited by the public health team. Students from 8 public high schools and 1 private high school in the parish will sit the exams. She says health officials are satisfied with the preparation done by schools in Westmoreland.
I have seen the erections of additional hand wash stations, especially at the entrance to some of these schools. I have seen soap, I've seen water, I've seen hand towel being erected. I've also seen where they are monitoring the temperature of staff members and students who are arriving. And so even as we wish all our students well, we implore that persons remain vigilant. If any student is sick at all, the health department needs to be notified.
In the meantime, she says the health department is actively working with other schools in the parish to prepare them for the full reopening of schools in September.
Primary schools have started contacting the health department. Some of our members have gone to their board meetings. They have been distributing posters to them to help them to get ready for the reopening of school in September. So we are trying to get COVID compliance, COVID vigilance and alertness in all sectors in Westmoreland.
And we now take a break on the midday news, but we'll be right back. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Continuing the news now. The Ministry of Local Government has started its hurricane preparedness activities in some of the most vulnerable communities in Portland. With the COVID-19 pandemic still present in the country, additional shelters are being selected should there be any suspected case during a hurricane.
Getting ready for the possibility of a hurricane. At least that's what the Ministry of Local Government has been focusing on in the last few days. On Sunday, a team from the ministry toured some of the most vulnerable communities in Portland to identify not only accessible relief areas close to them, but also potential isolation facilities.
We visited 2 schools, Mount Hermon Primary and Windsor All Age. We sought to identify isolation areas. Of course, we are still going through the period of COVID-19, and it is imperative that we have areas for isolation for any suspected case within a shelter.
Because what we are doing now is to look at classrooms and to see where we can put persons who are in the age group that are vulnerable. And we have found some locations here in Portland. As you know, Portland is one of those parishes that suffer severely whenever we have any major weather event.
And if we should remember the 2001 flooding, it was devastating. And as such, we have chosen an elevated area at Mount Hermon to serve even as far as Hope Bay if communities are impacted impacted.
Minister of Local Government Desmond McKenzie says an area for food storage is also being considered.
We are also going to be putting in an area where we can store food supplies so that in case of an event and the area is cut off. We have done a similar thing in Clarendon, because down on the south coast of Clarendon we have retrofitted a shelter there, and we have put in a container for the storage. And up in the Frankfield area of Clarendon, that is up in the northern side of Clarendon, we have done a similar thing. And hopefully we can get this done before we get deeper into the hurricane season.
Prince Moore, TVJ News.
The World Health Organization, WHO, says it's concerned that countries that overcame the first peak of the Covid-19 outbreak are now struggling with new peaks and accelerating cases after easing restrictions. WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus said there have been dangerous increases in cases in countries where proven measures to reduce risk are not implemented or followed. He was speaking at a media briefing this morning.
Too many countries are headed in the wrong direction. The virus remains public enemy number one, but the actions of many governments and people do not reflect of this. The only aim of the virus is to find people to infect. Mixed messages from leaders are undermining the most critical ingredient of any response: trust.
He said yesterday 230,000 cases of COVID-19 were reported to WHO. Almost 80% of those cases are reported from just 10 countries and 50% from just 2 countries. The WHO Director General commended countries in the Pacific, the Caribbean and Africa for being alert and aware in how they responded and prepared rapidly and effectively to the first cases of the virus, therefore avoiding large outbreaks. A magnitude 4.1 earthquake was recorded in sections of the island this morning. The earthquake unit confirmed that the quake occurred approximately 9:02 a.m. It was felt in sections of St. Elizabeth, Manchester, Clarendon and Kingston and St. Andrew. The epicenter of the quake was in St. Elizabeth. There are no reports of any damage. The National Water Commission, NWC, is warning that if drought conditions continue for another 14 days, it will impose harsher supply restrictions for the corporate area. The Commission last week issued a prohibition notice as water levels at the Mona Reservoir and the Hermitage Dam continued to dwindle. You can be prosecuted if you either waste water or use excessive amounts of the commodity for non-essential purposes. The NWC says further action might be necessary. The Hermitage Dam is now at 31.9% of capacity, while the Mona Reservoir is at 47.8% of capacity. The police have still not determined the motive for Friday's killing of a man and the injuring of another in a gun attack in Montego Bay, St. James. The deceased has been identified as 37-year-old Shedrock Finley of Coke Road in the parish. The police have withheld the identity of the injured man. However, it's understood he was in a wheelchair. Reports are that about 3:30 in the afternoon, Finley was walking along Orange Street in downtown Montego Bay when 2 men started chasing him. He was later shot. When the police arrived on the scene, 2 men were found suffering from gunshot wounds. They were taken to hospital where Finley was pronounced dead. Time now for sports. Some of the nation's top athletes turned out to the Velocity Fest at Jamaica College on Saturday, the first local track and field meet since the COVID-19 pandemic in March. Among the athletes on show were Shelley and Fraser Price, Elaine Thompson-Hera, Asafa Powell and Tajay Gale. Trishana McGowan tells us more.
Horse racing received company over the weekend when track and field got into action, showing sports is slowly returning on the island. The meet came on the heels of the Diamond League exhibition event, dubbed the Inspiration Games in Zurich, Switzerland on Thursday. With the sport being used to filling the majority of its 8 lanes, athletes had to adjust to the new conditions as not competing with COVID-19 protocols in place was a bit unique.
All the persons who were invited to put entries were sent out a letter indicating the wearing of masks, indicating not having more than 20 persons gathered together, to manage their teams, appoint someone who would actually be responsible for their participants, to ensure that the protocols were observed.
The athletes were socially distanced on track, featuring between 2 and 4 competing per heat.
Each lane is about 4 feet apart, so therefore we use lane 2, 4, 6, and 8 to ensure that social distancing would have been maintained.
The guidelines for athletes' arrival at the venue, warm-up sessions, and time in between each event were also significant.
That we did it in such a way to ensure that there was no multiplicity of persons who were going to be in one place at one time. With officials, we did significant official reduction, carrying it down to the bare minimum, again, to ensure that we maintain the protocol and social distance guidelines.
And when will we see another meet for the local athletes?
We cannot take the responsibility as to when the next one is. I think it has come out in the meeting in the media that the National Association, the J3As, intends to have meets. We're not there to compete with them. So basically, if they are going to have meets, and we won't go ahead and plan any other. But we wait and see. But we're hoping that these meets will occur pretty much every week because, as you can see by the results, athletes are a bit rusty. They do need a vital part of their training, which is competition.
Trishana McGowan, TVJ Sports.
And that's the Midday News. I'm Vashon Brown. Join us at 7 for Primetime News Package. On behalf of the news, sports and production teams, have a good afternoon and have a great week.